Princess Aelira Valtarin stood on the balcony of the Lurexian palace, her silver-blue hair catching the light of Lurexia's twin suns. At 19, she was the youngest heir in the Empire's long history. The weight of the crown had not yet touched her brow, but already she felt it pressing on her mind. The people of Lurexia expected perfection, discipline, and wisdom far beyond her years. And Aelira, raised in the traditions of her ancestors, had been trained to meet those expectations. The Lurexian Empire was a civilization of logic and order. Emotions were controlled, almost hidden, and decisions were made with careful calculation. Love, fear, joy, and sadness were considered distractions, obstacles to clear thinking. Aelira had grown up believing that showing emotion was a weakness. Yet, something about the galaxy beyond Lurexia always called to her. Other worlds, other species, and the mysteries of the stars were a puzzle she longed to understand. Today was different. Today she had chosen the subject of her coronation trials, the final set of tests that would prove she was ready to rule. According to Lurexian tradition, the heir must study a species outside their own and learn to understand its ways. This test was meant to show wisdom and adaptability, qualities her ancestors valued above all. Most heirs chose Lurexian colonies or nearby intelligent species, but Aelira was drawn to one of the smallest and least powerful species, humans. Humans fascinated her. They were nothing like Lurexians. They laughed, cried, and expressed feelings openly. They fought with passion rather than strategy. They made mistakes and learned from them in ways her people could not always understand. To Aelira, humans were unpredictable, yet strong. They lived in ways that made no sense to the cold logic of Lurexian thinking, and she wanted to understand them. Her council had been skeptical at first. Humans are primitive, the High Chancellor had said. They have no place in our studies. They will only waste your time. But Aelira had argued, her voice calm but firm. I will learn from them, whether you approve or not. The galaxy is full of diversity, and if Lurexia is to survive, we must understand all life, not just our own. Finally, the council relented. They assigned her a human guide, a young man named Evan Hale. The files described him as quiet, observant, and unusually patient. He does not speak much, the council warned. He may frustrate you, but do not let this interfere with your study. Aelira had smiled at the warning. Silence, she thought, was easy to break. A simple question or command would make him speak. Surely it could not be so difficult. When Evan first arrived, she was struck by his calmness. He was smaller than she had expected, with brown hair that fell lightly across his forehead and eyes that seemed to look right through her. He did not bow or kneel. He did not speak. He simply waited, standing straight but relaxed, like a tree rooted in the ground. Aelira studied him carefully. Hello, she said, testing her own voice. I am Princess Aelira Valtarin. I will be your guide and observer during this study. Evan nodded once, slowly. He did not say a word. The silence made her uneasy. She expected at least a greeting, a question, or some sign of recognition, but he simply stood there, calm and quiet. Days passed. Aelira asked questions. He did not answer. She tried reasoning, joking, even giving small tasks, hoping he would respond. Nothing. Every attempt ended the same way. Evan simply observed, calm and still. At first, Aelira thought she would grow frustrated, but slowly she realized that his silence was not weakness. It was strength. It made her pay attention to small details. The tilt of his head, the way he moved, the way he watched without judging. She noticed things about herself she had never seen before. When she spoke, she felt the need to choose her words carefully. When she acted, she considered why she acted. And when she felt an emotion, curiosity, excitement, frustration, she realized it could be more powerful than logic alone. One evening, as the twin suns set, Heir stood near the balcony again, watching Evan carefully. He was cleaning the observation room, moving quietly and efficiently. She realized he had done so without instructions. He understood something she had not. He moved not because he was told, but because he wanted to. "Why do you not speak?" she asked finally. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. Evan looked at her, his brown eyes calm and unflinching. He tilted his head slightly and gave a single simple nod. Heir frowned. She had expected words or maybe even defiance. Instead, there was only understanding, a quiet strength that made her chest tighten. For the first time in her life, she felt unsure. Heir, heir to the largest empire in her region of space, felt small and vulnerable. Her confidence, which had always been her shield, now seemed fragile. A human, one human, had challenged her in a way no Lorexian ever had. Her nights became restless. She could not stop thinking about him. The calmness, the patience, the quiet strength. It was unlike anything she had experienced, and it made her question everything she had been taught. Was Lorexian discipline enough? Was emotion truly weakness? Could a human teach her something more valuable than years of study in the palace? The coronation trials were approaching, and she knew she had to make progress. But now, progress was no longer just about learning human behavior. It was about understanding him. The human who refused to speak had become a puzzle she could not solve. And for the first time, Heir wondered if her own strength, the strength of a princess trained for leadership, was enough to face the lessons this human would teach her. As the twin suns dipped below the horizon, casting the palace in shades of gold and silver, Heir felt a strange excitement. A challenge had arrived at her doorstep, silent but powerful, and she knew deep in her heart that nothing in her life, no trial, no lesson, no book, would prepare her for what was coming. The Princess of Lorexia, heir to a mighty empire, was about to learn from the quietest voice she had ever heard, and that voice would change everything. Days turned into weeks, and Princess Heir found herself more curious and more frustrated than ever. Evan Hale, the human assigned to her study, remained as silent as the stars. He moved through the palace halls calmly, never raising his voice, never asking questions, never complaining. He simply existed, observing everything and refusing to speak. At first, Heir had tried patience. She had asked simple questions, expecting short answers. "What do you eat for breakfast?" she asked one morning. No reply. "Do you like Lorexia?" No reply. Even when she offered him books about her people, he did not speak a word. He simply turned the pages carefully, reading in silence, his face unreadable. The silence began to feel heavier every day. Heir realized it was not empty. It demanded something from her, attention, focus, even humility. She could not ignore him. She could not push him aside. His quiet strength was beginning to unsettle her. The High Chancellor noticed the change in the princess. "Your Highness," he said one morning as they walked through the palace gardens, "do not let this human distract you. He is a subject for observation, nothing more. Focus on your duties and your studies." Heir nodded politely, but inside she felt a growing tension. "He is more than a subject," she whispered to herself as she watched Evan carefully organize the garden's records. "There is something about him I must understand." One afternoon, Heir decided to test him in a new way. She presented a puzzle that required teamwork to solve. "Evan," she said, "we must arrange these star maps in order of their importance to the Empire. Will you help me?" He looked at her for a moment, then nodded. But he said nothing. They worked side by side, Heir speaking constantly, trying to explain her reasoning. Evan did not respond. He simply followed her instructions, placing the maps carefully, making small corrections only when necessary. By the time the task was complete, Elira realized something startling. She had been talking almost non-stop, yet the one who had guided the work quietly, Evan, had been more effective. His silence had made her aware of her own impatience, her own need to dominate the situation. "Why do you not speak?" she asked again, frustration mixing with curiosity. "Is it because you do not understand me?" Evan finally looked at her, and this time, his gaze held a kind of calm certainty. He shook his head slowly. Elira's frustration deepened. He understood perfectly. Then why did he remain silent? She began to watch him even more carefully, noticing small gestures, the way his eyes followed her movements, the way his hands paused when he thought, the way he listened without judgment. The princess realized that his silence was not ignorance. It was something far more powerful. It demanded respect. It made her reconsider every assumption she had about leadership, strength, and intelligence. The turning point came one night during a storm. Lyrexia's twin suns had set, and rain fell in silver sheets against the palace windows. Elira was working late in her study, preparing notes for her next coronation trial. Suddenly, the room shook. A beam in the ceiling cracked, and a heavy chandelier began to fall. Elira froze, unsure what to do. Her training had taught her control, but this was unexpected. Before she could react, Evan moved. He caught the chandelier with a strength she did not know a human possessed and steadied it. Then he grabbed her arm and pulled her away from danger. When the storm passed and the danger ended, Elira was trembling. "How did you—" she began. But Evan only shook his head. She searched his eyes. "Why did you help me?" He paused, and then, in a voice calm and steady, he said just one sentence. "Because you look lonely." Elira felt a strange warmth in her chest. The words were so simple, so small, yet they carried more meaning than anything she had ever heard in her life. She realized that for all her power, for all her training and knowledge, she had never experienced honesty in such a raw and pure form. The princess was stunned. Her life had always been full of rules, expectations, and ceremonies. Her people respected strength and intelligence above all. But Evan's silence, broken only by a single honest statement, had shown her something she had never known: the power of human emotion, of trust, and of connection. From that night on, Elira's view of him changed completely. She no longer saw him as a mere subject of observation. He was a teacher, in a way no Lyrexian ever could be. Every silence, every gesture, every calm glance became a lesson. She began to study humans in a new way, not just their behavior, but their presence. She learned that listening could teach more than speaking, that patience could be stronger than logic, and that quiet strength could influence even the most disciplined mind. The palace staff noticed the change in her. The princess, who had once carried herself with absolute confidence, now hesitated before making decisions. She consulted Evan more than her advisors. She watched him, studied him, and slowly began to understand the subtle ways humans communicated, through expression, gesture, and action, rather than words alone. But the council was not pleased. They whispered among themselves, worried that the human was changing the heir's mind, her attitude, even her heart. "Elira is no longer focused," one council member complained. "She is letting a human influence her. It is dangerous." Elira ignored them. She felt a strange sense of liberation. For the first time, she could think for herself, without the strict rules of the council dictating every action. And the human who refused to speak had been the catalyst for this change. One evening, as the twin suns rose again, Elira found herself on the balcony with Evan. The city below was quiet, the streets shimmering under the rising light. She looked at him, realizing that the silence between them was no longer uncomfortable. It was a bridge. "Do you know," she said quietly, "how much you have taught me in just a few weeks?" Evan tilted his head slightly, a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. He did not answer in words. He did not need to. Elira realized something profound. Humans, she thought, were not just unpredictable or weak or simple. They were strong in ways Lorexians could not measure. They could endure, wait, observe, and influence without a single word. And a single human, one quiet, observant, patient human, could change even the heir to the greatest empire in the galaxy. For the first time in her life, Elira felt uncertain. She did not know what the future held, but she felt ready to learn, and she knew one thing for certain. Evan Hale, the human who would not speak, had already begun to change her life. She had never expected it. She had never planned for it. And yet, it was happening, silently, steadily, and completely. The trials were coming. Her coronation would soon begin. And she was no longer sure she was the same princess who had once stood on the balcony, confident and proud. Evan's silence had opened a door, and Elira was ready to step through it. The days that followed the storm brought an unusual calm to the palace. Princess Elira had begun to see Evan in a new light. His quiet strength, once frustrating, now felt reassuring. She watched him move through the palace halls, tending to tasks without being told, observing events without interruption. And yet, his silence remained a mystery she could not solve. One morning, Elira decided to study him more closely. She wanted to understand the reason behind his quiet demeanor. Perhaps there was a secret, something hidden that explained why he spoke so little. She began with simple observations. She watched him eat breakfast, noting the way he handled utensils with care and attention. She followed him during his morning exercises, seeing how his movements were precise but relaxed. She watched how he interacted with the palace staff. They spoke freely, asking him questions or giving instructions, yet he rarely responded. Only once, when a young servant had struggled to carry a heavy tray, did he step forward and help silently. Elira was beginning to sense a pattern. Evan's silence was not ignorance, fear, or stubbornness. It was deliberate. He spoke only when it mattered, when his words carried meaning beyond simple communication. Determined to learn more, Elira arranged a series of tests. She asked him questions about Lorexian history, about the galaxy, about humans themselves. She tried to provoke reactions, to see if she could break his composure. Nothing worked. Evan's calm remained unbroken. He moved, he observed. He acted when necessary. But he never spoke without reason. Frustration bubbled in Elira at first. She was used to commanding attention. She was used to controlling situations. But with Evan, she could not do either. His quiet presence demanded patience, reflection, and humility, qualities she had never needed in the same way before. One afternoon, as Elira reviewed some star maps in her study, she noticed something unusual. Evan was sitting nearby, his eyes scanning the room, his attention on her notes. She realized that he was learning from her as much as she was learning from him. He absorbed her movements, her focus, her habits, and perhaps even her emotions. "Why do you watch me so carefully?" she asked, almost unable to stop herself. Evan tilted his head slightly. He did not answer. But the look in his eyes was not disrespectful or bored. It was thoughtful, curious, and patient. Elira felt a strange mix of admiration and unease. How could someone who said so little hold such power over her thoughts? That night, sleep eluded her. She lay in her chambers, staring at the twin suns as they set, thinking about the human who refused to speak. She remembered the words he had spoken during the storm. "Because you look lonely." Those words had been simple, almost childlike in their honesty, and yet they had shaken her completely. They had made her realize how isolated she had been, not just as a princess, but as a person. Her life had been full of rules, expectations, and ceremonies. She had friends, advisors, and servants, but few people ever saw her as she truly was. Evan, in a single sentence, had seen her. Determined to uncover more, Elira decided to experiment. She arranged a series of interactions between Evan and other humans from distant colonies who had come to the palace as guests. She watched carefully, curious about his behavior. What she saw surprised her. Evan spoke with them, softly, politely, and with a gentle humor she had never expected. He laughed sometimes, shared stories, and offered advice. But when Elira was present, he returned to silence, observing her with the same calm intensity. Elira's mind raced. It was not that he could not speak. He chose not to speak to her. His silence was deliberate, a form of respect, perhaps even a way of teaching her something without words. The next day, she confronted him. "You speak to others, but not to me," she said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Why?" Evan looked at her, and for the first time she felt a deep understanding pass between them without a single word spoken. He shook his head slowly, then gestured toward her study materials and the notes she had written. He wanted her to see something beyond words. Elira took a deep breath. She realized that his silence was a mirror. He reflected back her thoughts, her emotions, her actions. In speaking freely, humans often said too much. In remaining silent, Evan made her think, observe, and learn in ways she had never known. The revelation was both thrilling and frightening. She had always believed that words were power. But Evan had shown her that silence could be even more powerful. A single human, by choosing not to speak, could challenge the heir to an empire and make her question herself, her beliefs, and her authority. Later that evening, Elira took a walk through the palace gardens. Evan followed silently, as he always did. The fountains reflected the glow of the twin moons, and the air was filled with the scent of alien blossoms. "Evan," she said softly, "I am beginning to understand why you do not speak." He looked at her, eyes calm, patient, encouraging. "You are teaching me," she continued, "not with words, but with your silence. You are showing me strength, patience, and understanding. I have never learned anything like this before." Evan simply nodded. No words were needed. His presence, quiet but firm, said more than anything else ever could. The council continued to watch from afar, growing increasingly uneasy. They whispered among themselves, concerned that the princess was being influenced by a human. But Elira did not care. She had begun to see beyond their logic, beyond their expectations. She was learning something far more important, the subtle, quiet power of human emotion and thought. That night, Elira returned to her chambers and studied the galaxy maps once more. She thought of the planets she would one day govern, the species she would need to understand, and the decisions she would need to make. And she realized something profound. Strength was not only measured in power or knowledge. Sometimes it was measured in patience, in understanding, in the ability to learn from another being without trying to dominate or control them. And Evan, the human who refused to speak, had already begun to teach her these lessons. For the first time, Elira felt a sense of freedom. She did not yet know what the future held. She did not yet know how her trials would turn out. But she knew this. She had discovered a truth that no Lurexian ruler had ever known, and it had come from the quietest, most unexpected teacher she could imagine. As she lay down to rest, her thoughts turned to the human who had changed everything. Alira realized that the coronation trials were no longer just about proving her worth as a ruler. They were about learning, understanding, and growing. And Evan Hale, in his silence, was showing her the way. And the princess, heir to the greatest empire in the galaxy, felt for the first time that she was truly ready to learn. The palace was quiet that morning, but Princess Elira felt a restless energy inside her. The coronation trials were drawing closer, and her every action was now under scrutiny. Yet she was no longer the same princess who had started studying Evan Hale weeks ago. His quiet presence had begun to change her, subtly, but unmistakably. She thought more carefully before acting, listened more than she spoke, and noticed details she had previously ignored. Evan, as always, was near her side, silent but attentive. He moved with calm precision, anticipating needs without being told. Elira had grown to rely on him, though she did not always understand why. Perhaps it was his silence, or perhaps it was the way he observed her without judgment. Either way, she could no longer ignore the truth. Evan had become essential, not only to her studies, but to her very life in the palace. One afternoon, the High Chancellor summoned her to his chambers. His face was stern, and his voice carried the weight of authority. "Your Highness," he said, "your bond with this human is growing too strong. He is not part of the royal line. He cannot influence the heir to the throne. You must end this relationship before it is too late." Elira's eyes narrowed. "He is not trying to influence me," she said calmly. "He is teaching me, and I am learning more from him than I ever could from you or any counselor." The High Chancellor's expression darkened. "You are risking the stability of the empire. The coronation trials are not a time for personal attachments. If you continue down this path, you may fail them, and the empire could suffer." Elira did not reply. She turned and left the chamber, her mind already racing with thoughts of Evan. She knew the council did not understand. They never had. They valued obedience above all else, and Evan's quiet presence was not obedient. But obedience was not what she wanted anymore. She wanted understanding. She wanted perspective. She wanted strength, the kind that Evan embodied. That evening, she found him in the gardens, examining the alien flora with careful attention. He looked up as she approached, his brown eyes calm, patient, and steady. "I have been summoned by the council," she said quietly. "They do not approve of you." Evan tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. He said nothing. Elira sighed and sat on the edge of the fountain. "They fear you. They fear what you are teaching me. But I will not stop learning. I will not stop listening. And I will not let them take you from me." For the first time, she saw a flicker of emotion cross Evan's face. A small, almost imperceptible smile. He knelt beside the fountain and picked up a fallen leaf, handing it to her without a word. The gesture spoke more than any speech could. It said, "I am here. I will not leave." The days passed, and the bond between princess and human grew stronger. Elira began to share more of her thoughts and fears, though she rarely expected a reply. She would speak while Evan listened, and she found that simply speaking aloud clarified her mind. His silence was a kind of mirror, reflecting her own thoughts back to her with clarity and patience. One morning, a message arrived from a neighboring planet. Rebels had been spotted near the Imperial Hall. The council quickly convened, and alarms rang through the palace. Elira, though trained for such crises, felt her heart race in a way she had not experienced before. Evan was immediately at her side, calm and composed. Without waiting for instructions, he assessed the situation, moving through the hallways with quiet precision. When Elira hesitated, unsure which path to take, he gestured toward a hidden passage she had never noticed. "You know this way?" she asked. He nodded once. Trusting him completely, she followed. Together, they navigated the secret corridors, moving past guards and alarmed servants. Heir realized, with a strange mix of fear and admiration, that she had never felt safer than she did at that moment, guided by a human who refused to speak. When they reached a secure chamber, Heir paused, breathing heavily. "You saved me," she said, her voice barely audible. Evan looked at her, and finally he spoke a few words. "It is what I must do." There was no arrogance, no pride, only calm determination. Heir felt a deep respect for him, the kind of respect that changed her understanding of strength. Lurexians measured strength in control, in precision, in following the rules. Evan's strength was measured differently, in courage, in presence, in quiet action when it mattered most. Over the following days, the palace slowly returned to normal. The rebels had been captured, and the council praised the efficiency of the defense. Yet Heir knew the real lesson had not come from strategy or weapons. It had come from Evan. She began to see the empire differently. The traditions that once seemed so perfect now appeared rigid, almost suffocating. She realized that leadership required more than control and logic. It required understanding, empathy, and the ability to listen, qualities she had learned from a single human. One evening, she sat with Evan in her private study, gazing at the stars. "Do you know what you are teaching me?" she asked softly. He tilted his head, listening. "You are teaching me that strength is not always loud or forceful," she continued. "That patience can be more powerful than speed. That silence can speak louder than words. You have changed the way I see myself and my empire." Evan did not reply in words. He simply placed a hand on the table near hers, a small gesture of reassurance. Heir smiled, realizing that some lessons could not be spoken, only felt. The council, meanwhile, grew increasingly wary. Whispers of discontent reached Heir, suggesting that the princess was becoming too reliant on a human, too influenced by an outsider. They debated removing him from the palace, believing it would protect the heir from distraction. But Heir refused. She faced them with calm authority, a confidence she had gained not from tradition, but from understanding. "He has taught me more than any counselor ever could," she said firmly. "He is not a distraction, he is a guide, and I will not remove him." The council fell silent. They had no words to counter her reasoning, for it was not logic that guided her anymore, but insight. Insight she had gained from Evan's quiet presence. Days later, Heir stood once more on the balcony, looking out over the city. The twin suns cast long shadows across the palace grounds, painting the marble in gold and silver. She felt a strange sense of calm. She had faced danger, questioned tradition, and begun to understand a new kind of power. Evan approached silently, standing beside her without a word. She looked at him and realized something profound. The heir to an empire, trained in discipline and control, had learned humility, patience, and courage from a single human. And she knew that the future of Lurexia would never be the same. The bond between princess and human had grown beyond study, beyond obligation, and beyond expectation. It had become a force, quiet, steady, and powerful enough to challenge an empire. Heir understood now that the coronation trials were no longer about proving her strength. They were about discovering it, in herself and in those around her. And Evan, through his silence and steadfast presence, had become the greatest teacher she had ever known. As the stars began to shine above Lurexia, Heir made a silent promise to herself and to the human at her side. She would rule not as her ancestors had, but as she had learned to, with patience, understanding, and the quiet power of listening. And with that promise, the princess felt ready to face whatever the trials, the council, or the galaxy could throw at her. The morning of the coronation trials had finally arrived. The halls of the Lorexian palace buzzed with anticipation, officials and counselors moving quickly to prepare for the examinations of the heir. Princess Elira stood in her chambers, gazing at the ceremonial robes laid out before her. She felt a strange mixture of pride, nervousness, and excitement. Evan Hale, as always, was near her side. His calm presence was steadying, reminding her that she was not alone. She had learned more from him than from years of lessons, and now, as the trials began, she knew that his guidance had prepared her in ways no one else could. The first trial tested strategy and intelligence. The council presented a scenario in which Elira had to defend a distant Lorexian colony from an unexpected attack. Most heirs would have relied solely on their knowledge of tactics and the rules of engagement. Elira, however, approached it differently. She considered not only the enemy's movements, but also the lives of the colonists. She thought of how humans like Evan valued protection and courage, and she realized that victory did not require dominance alone. It required care, planning, and understanding. When she presented her plan, the council was silent. It was unconventional, combining logic with empathy, efficiency with protection. They had never seen an heir approach a trial this way. The second trial examined leadership under pressure. A simulated rebellion was staged within the palace, testing the heir's ability to act decisively while maintaining control. Alarms blared, holographic invaders appeared, and advisors shouted instructions. Elira remained calm. She moved through the chaos with a clarity she had never felt before, guiding guards and protecting civilians. Evan was by her side, moving silently, anticipating threats, and guiding her through hidden passages and safe zones. When Elira hesitated, unsure which way to proceed, she felt his presence, and his quiet confidence bolstered her own. Together, they completed the trial flawlessly. The council, though impressed, was visibly unsettled. This human, this silent, unassuming figure, had changed the way the heir approached every challenge. The third trial tested the heir's ability to inspire and unite. A group of Lorexian citizens and representatives from other species had been gathered. The heir had to speak, to motivate, and to show leadership that could bring harmony to a diverse audience. Elira stepped forward, her robes flowing, her heart steady. She looked at the assembly and realized she did not need to impress them with grand speeches or elaborate words. Instead, she spoke honestly, with empathy, and with clarity. She shared her vision for the empire, one of understanding, patience, and cooperation. She spoke of the lessons she had learned from observing humans, of the value of listening, of the strength in quiet reflection. Evan stood beside her, silent but supportive. When she mentioned the importance of understanding others, she looked at him briefly. His calm gaze reassured her. She realized that his silence had been a teacher all along, showing her the power of presence, patience, and understanding without words. The crowd listened, captivated. By the time she finished, the assembly erupted in approval. Even the council could not deny that she had demonstrated qualities far beyond her years. The final trial was the most personal, a test of judgment, morality, and decision-making under uncertainty. A scenario was presented in which the heir had to make a choice between obeying strict imperial law or following personal ethics that could save lives. Elira thought of Evan. She remembered how he had acted during the storm, during the hidden passages, and during their quiet conversations in the gardens. She understood that leadership was not just about rules or power. It was about seeing the bigger picture, considering the consequences, and choosing courage over convenience. With confidence, she made her decision, guided by both logic and empathy. It was a choice that balanced duty and compassion, tradition and progress. The council conferred in hushed tones. They had never witnessed such judgment from an heir, one that was fair, wise, and brave. When they finally announced her success, the applause that followed was thunderous. Heir had passed every trial, and she had done so in a way that promised a new era for the Empire. After the trials, the High Chancellor approached her, a mixture of respect and caution in his eyes. "Princess," he said slowly, "it seems we underestimated you. You have proven yourself beyond expectation." Heir smiled gently. "I have learned from many sources," she said, glancing at Evan. "But one teacher has been the most important." Evan simply nodded, his calm demeanor unchanged, yet somehow filled with quiet pride. The coronation ceremony that followed was unlike any Lurexian had ever seen. Heir stood before the assembly, not as a ruler who demanded obedience, but as one who inspired respect through understanding and wisdom. She took the throne, her mind steady and her heart strong, knowing that the lessons she had learned from a single human had shaped her into the leader she had become. When it was time for her to speak, she addressed the assembly with confidence and clarity. "An empire is only as strong as its people," she said, "and strength comes not only from power, but from understanding, patience, and courage. We must listen as much as we speak, observe as much as we act, and value every voice, even those that speak in silence." All eyes turned to Evan. For the first time, the human spoke publicly in front of the entire assembly. His voice was calm, measured, and clear. "She will be a better leader because she listens," he said simply. A silence fell over the hall, not of fear, but of respect. The words were few, yet they carried immense weight. The princess, the heir to the Lurexian Empire, had been shaped not only by tradition and training, but by a quiet human who understood the power of presence and thought. Heir looked at him and smiled. The empire had changed, and the future looked brighter than ever. Her people would not only follow her because of her title, but because of her wisdom, her compassion, and the lessons she had learned from one extraordinary human. From that day forward, Lurexia entered a new era. Decisions were made with care, understanding, and foresight. The council, once skeptical of change, began to see the value of listening, learning, and embracing new perspectives. And Heir, the youngest ruler in the empire's history, had a quiet companion and guide by her side, the human who had taught her more than any teacher, any book, or any tradition ever could. The princess realized that leadership was not about speaking the loudest or demanding the most attention. It was about listening, observing, understanding, and acting wisely. And Evan, with his silence and steadfast presence, had shown her that the quietest voice could be the most powerful of all. As the twin suns set over Lurexia, casting golden light across the palace, Heir and Evan stood together on the balcony. She felt a profound sense of peace and certainty. The trials were over, the crown was hers, and the empire was ready for a future built not only on logic and strength, but on understanding, empathy, and courage. The human who had once refused to speak had changed everything, and in doing so, he had helped the princess find her true strength. And so, under the twin suns of Lurexia, a new era began, one guided by wisdom, compassion, and the quiet power of a human who had spoken only when it mattered most.